Good evening and welcome to my channel. The most dangerous diplomatic standoff on the planet just hit a wall. Iran walked out of Geneva yesterday without a deal. Trump's envoys Witkoff and Kushner flew home disappointed. And today, the President of the United States is sitting in the Oval Office reviewing military strike options against Iran, while two aircraft carrier strike groups carrying over 100 fighter jets are already positioned off the Iranian coast. This is not a drill. This is not political theater. The Pentagon Central Command was briefed today on kinetic action options. One anonymous Trump advisor told Axios this week, there is a 90% chance we see military action in the next few weeks. Let that number sink in, 90%. And the single issue that broke the Geneva talks and pushed the world to this edge is 5 words. Iran refuses zero enrichment demand. Stay with me, because what is happening right now between Washington and Tehran is the most consequential decision of 2026, and the next 7 days will determine whether the Middle East enters its most destructive war since 1973 or pulls back from the edge at the last possible second. Let me give you the complete picture of what happened in Geneva yesterday, because the details are critical and most media is glossing over the most important parts. This was the 3rd round of indirect nuclear negotiations between the United States and Iran. Indirect means the two delegations did not sit in the same room. Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi physically walked between the American team and the Iranian team all day, carrying proposals back and forth. The American delegation was led by Steve Witkoff, Trump's Middle East envoy, and Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law. The Iranian delegation was led by Foreign Minister FM Araghchi. The talks lasted approximately 6 hours, split into a morning and an afternoon session. After the morning session, sources told Axios that Witkoff and Kushner were disappointed with the Iranian positions. After the afternoon session, the Omani mediator announced that both sides had identified what he called the main elements of a possible agreement, and that technical talks would continue next week in Vienna at the IAEA headquarters. That sounds like progress. But here is what the diplomatic language is hiding. The core American demand going into Geneva was absolute, non-negotiable, and stated publicly by Vice President J.D. Vance just 24 hours before talks began. The principle is very simple, Vance said. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. If they try to rebuild a nuclear weapon, that causes problems for us. Trump's position, as communicated through Witkoff, was that Iran must agree to zero uranium enrichment on Iranian soil permanently, not reduced enrichment, not enrichment at civilian levels as permitted under the 2015 nuclear deal. Zero, none, permanently, forever. Iran's position, as communicated through Araghchi, was equally clear and equally stated publicly. Iran will not discuss its missile program. Iran will not surrender its enrichment capability. Iran is willing to discuss limits on enrichment levels and quantities in exchange for comprehensive sanctions relief. But zero enrichment is not acceptable to Tehran. Full stop. Those two positions are not a gap that can be bridged by creative diplomatic language in Vienna next week. They are a fundamental contradiction. Either Iran enriches uranium or it does not. There is no technical middle ground that satisfies both sides simultaneously. The Vienna technical talks are not going to solve this. They are going to expose it further. Now, let me explain exactly why Iran's enrichment capability matters so much that both sides are willing to risk a catastrophic war over it, because this is the detail that most news coverage never fully explains. Uranium enrichment is the process of increasing the concentration of the uranium-235 isotope in uranium fuel. Natural uranium contains about 0.7% uranium-235. Civilian nuclear reactor fuel requires enrichment to approximately 3 to 5%. Research reactor fuel requires approximately 20% enrichment, which the IAEA defines as highly enriched uranium. A nuclear bomb requires uranium enriched to 90% or above. Iran is currently enriching uranium to 60%. That is not civilian. That is not research. 60% enrichment has no legitimate peaceful use whatsoever. The only reason to enrich uranium to 60% is to have a short runway to weapons-grade 90% enrichment when a political decision is made to cross that line. The IAEA confirmed in its most recent report that Iran currently holds approximately 10,000 kilograms of enriched uranium stockpile at various enrichment levels. The United States intelligence community assessed publicly that Iran could produce enough weapons-grade uranium for one nuclear bomb in approximately 1 week if it made the political decision to do so right now today. 1 week. Iran is a week away from having sufficient fissile material for a nuclear weapon if its supreme leader decides tomorrow that is what he wants. This is why Trump demanded zero enrichment as the non-negotiable baseline. Because any enrichment capability above zero means Iran retains the ability to go from peaceful nuclear program to nuclear bomb material in a matter of days or weeks, regardless of what any diplomatic agreement says on paper. Iran's response is equally logical from Tehran's perspective. Enrichment is a sovereign right under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty for states that have signed it. Iran signed the NPT. Enrichment for civilian purposes is legally permitted. Giving up enrichment permanently means giving up energy independence, scientific capability, and most importantly, the deterrent value of nuclear ambiguity, which is the single most powerful guarantee against a repeat of what happened to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, who gave up his nuclear program in 2003 and was overthrown and killed 8 years later. Iranian leaders have explicitly cited the Gaddafi example in public statements as the lesson they have drawn from history. Surrender your nuclear capability and you lose your regime. That calculation has not changed after 1 day of talks in Geneva. Here is the military picture on the ground right now, and this is where the situation becomes genuinely terrifying for everyone living in a 1,000-kilometer radius of Tehran. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group has been positioned in the Arabian Sea and Gulf region since late January. On February 14th, Trump announced he was dispatching a second carrier strike group, the USS Gerald R. Ford, to the Middle East. The Ford departed Suda Bay in Crete on February 26th, yesterday, heading directly toward the Iranian coast. 2 American carrier strike groups simultaneously in the Middle East is one of the largest U.S. naval deployments in the region in decades. Each carrier strike group includes the carrier itself with approximately 70 to 90 aircraft, multiple guided missile destroyers, a guided missile cruiser, attack submarines, and logistical support vessels. Combined, the 2 strike groups represent approximately 160 to 180 combat aircraft, dozens of Tomahawk cruise missiles, and multiple platforms capable of launching precision strikes against targets anywhere in Iran simultaneously. The U.S. Air Force has also been repositioning assets. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers are capable of striking hardened underground nuclear facilities with massive ordnance penetrator bombs that weigh 30,000 pounds each and are specifically designed to destroy deeply buried targets. Iran's most important nuclear facilities, including the Fordo enrichment plant, are buried under approximately 80 meters of rock and concrete, specifically to survive conventional airstrikes. The massive ordnance penetrator is the only conventional weapon in any country's arsenal capable of reaching them. The United States has them. No other country does. Trump also told British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in a phone call this month that the U.S. would want to use RAF Fairford in England and the shared Diego Garcia base in the Indian Ocean as staging points for Iran's strike operations. The British government has reportedly blocked this request, which triggered Trump to withdraw his support for the Chagos Islands deal with Britain. America's closest ally publicly blocked a key American military request, and Trump immediately retaliated by canceling a diplomatic deal worth significant strategic value to the UK. That tells you everything about how serious Washington is about the military option. When America is willing to blow up its relationship with Britain over basing rights for Iran's strikes, the planning is beyond the theoretical stage. Now, let me explain Iran's deterrence position, because understanding what Tehran can actually do in response to American strikes is essential for understanding why this crisis is so dangerous and why the entire region is on edge right now. Iran has approximately 3,000 ballistic missiles of various ranges, according to publicly available intelligence assessments. These include the Shahab series, the Sejil series, and the newer Fatah hypersonic missile, which Iran claims can travel at Mach 15 and maneuver during flight, making it extremely difficult to intercept. American military bases in the region are within range. Qatar hosts Al Udeid Air Base, which is the largest American military installation in the Middle East, with approximately 10,000 U.S. personnel. Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq all host significant numbers of American military personnel. All of them are within range of Iranian missiles. Iran's IRGC proxy network remains operational in the region despite Israel's degradation campaign in 2025. Hezbollah in Lebanon retains substantial rocket capability. Houthi forces in Yemen have already demonstrated the capability to strike Israel, Saudi Arabia, and disrupt Red Sea shipping. Iranian-backed militia groups in Iraq have American personnel in their missile range. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi said this in an interview on Wednesday, and I want you to hear these words carefully. There would be no victory for anybody. It would be a devastating war. Since the Americans' bases are scattered through different places in the region, unfortunately, perhaps the whole region would be engaged and involved. So it is a very terrible scenario. The Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 21 million barrels of oil per day, which is approximately 20% of the entire world's daily oil consumption. Iran demonstrated on February 3rd that it could close the strait when IRGC gunboats attempted to seize a U.S.-flagged tanker, and the strait was closed for several hours during Iranian military exercises on February 17th. A sustained closure of the Strait of Hormuz would trigger an immediate global energy crisis. Oil prices would spike to levels not seen since 2008, or potentially higher. The global economy, which is already fragile from 4 years of post-pandemic adjustment, tariff wars, and inflation, would face a simultaneous energy shock and regional war. This is the scenario that keeps finance ministers in Tokyo, Berlin, and Delhi awake at night, regardless of whether they have any stake in the nuclear dispute itself. Here's the geopolitical calculation that makes this situation even more complex. Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has stated publicly and repeatedly that Iran will not build nuclear weapons. He has cited a religious fatwa prohibiting weapons of mass destruction. Senior Iranian official Ali Shamkhani, who advises the Supreme Leader directly, wrote on social media during the Geneva talks that if zero enrichment is genuinely the American position, it actually aligns with the Supreme Leader's fatwa and Iran's defensive doctrine, and an immediate agreement is within reach. That statement is significant. It suggests that at the theological and ideological level, Iran's supreme leadership may be more flexible than the public negotiating position indicates. But there is a critical difference between not building a nuclear weapon as a matter of religious principle and permanently surrendering the enrichment capability that makes building one possible. Iran wants to maintain the capability without using it. America wants to eliminate the capability completely. That gap defines the entire impasse. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian tried to thread this needle publicly on Thursday when he said the following: "Our supreme leader has already said that we will not have nuclear weapons at all. The leader of a religious community cannot lie. They can eliminate me, eliminate anyone. If they hit us 100 more like us will come up to run the country." That statement contains three messages simultaneously. Iran will not build the bomb as a matter of principled religious commitment. Iran is not afraid of assassination or regime change. And Iran will survive any American military action because the system is bigger than any individual. The problem is that Trump does not accept religious fatwa as a verification mechanism. The United States wants physical dismantlement, international inspection, and permanent legal prohibition. Faith in a supreme leader's theological ruling is not a substitute for centrifuge disassembly verified by IAEA cameras, and that is where diplomacy has run out of road. Here is what the Geneva talks actually produced that the optimistic diplomatic language is obscuring. Iran handed the Omani mediator a written proposal on Wednesday night before Thursday's talks. That proposal was described by Iranian sources as politically serious, technically creative, and including everything required to reach an agreement immediately. The U.S. team reviewed it. After the morning session, Witkoff and Kushner were described as disappointed. After more talks in the afternoon, the U.S. team did not walk out immediately, which the International Crisis Group's Iran expert Ali Vaez described as a positive sign, saying there might still not be a breakthrough at the end of this day. But the very fact that the U.S. team is returning shows there is enough common ground between the two sides. The final outcome was a statement of significant progress from the Omani mediator, a decision to hold technical talks in Vienna next week at the IAEA, and a commitment to consult with respective capitals before reconvening. No deal, no framework agreement, no joint statement of principles, no date for a leaders' meeting, no commitment on enrichment from either side. Technical talks in Vienna next week means nuclear engineers and lawyers discussing verification mechanisms and enrichment levels without having resolved the fundamental political question of whether Iran keeps any enrichment capability at all. That is not progress toward a deal. That is sophisticated delay while both sides decide whether the other side is serious enough to prevent a war. 3 scenarios for the next 30 days because the decision point is that close. Scenario A is the Vienna breakthrough. Iranian technical teams arrive at the IAEA in Vienna next week with a revised proposal that offers to cap enrichment at 3.67%, the civilian nuclear fuel level permitted under the 2015 deal, with a verifiable reduction of the 10,000-kilogram uranium stockpile to below 300 kilograms. Full IAEA camera access and inspector presence, and a commitment to dismantle the most advanced centrifuge cascades. Trump accepts this as a functional equivalent of zero enrichment risk, even if it is not literally zero. A deal framework is announced. The carriers remain in position, but military action is suspended. Iran gets partial sanctions relief, while full relief is linked to implementation milestones. This outcome is possible, but requires both sides to retreat from their stated maximum positions. Probability approximately 25%. Scenario B is controlled escalation. Vienna talks produce no agreement on the core enrichment question. Trump announces a final deadline of 30 days for Iran to accept American terms. He imposes maximum sanctions, including secondary sanctions on all buyers of Iranian oil hitting India and China directly, and creating a diplomatic crisis with both countries simultaneously. Iran responds by enriching uranium to 90% in retaliation, crossing the red line Trump drew in his State of the Union address. Trump orders limited airstrikes targeting Iranian enrichment facilities at Fordow and Natanz. Iran retaliates against American bases in the region with ballistic missiles killing American personnel. The United States conducts a broader second wave of strikes. The conflict escalates in unpredictable ways involving Hezbollah, Houthi forces, and Iranian proxies across the entire Middle East simultaneously. This is the nightmare scenario that nobody in any capital wants, but that the current trajectory points toward if diplomacy fails completely. Probability approximately 40% if Vienna produces no meaningful progress. Scenario C is the frozen standoff. Vienna talks produce enough technical language to give both sides political cover for delay. Iran agrees to freeze enrichment at current levels without reducing stockpile. Trump accepts the freeze as a temporary arrangement, while negotiations on a permanent deal continue. Neither side declares victory. The carriers stay in the region. Sanctions remain. Iranian economy continues to suffer with 68% annual inflation and 105% food inflation, destroying living standards for ordinary Iranians. The crisis continues at high temperature without exploding into open war. This is the most likely immediate outcome at approximately 35% probability because both sides have strong domestic incentives to avoid being the one that pulls the trigger on a catastrophic regional war. Here's the bottom line that nobody in mainstream media is saying clearly enough. The Geneva talks did not fail, but they did not succeed either. They produced a delay. Vienna next week is another opportunity for either a breakthrough or a final collapse. And the most dangerous element of the entire situation is not Iranian enrichment capacity or American carrier deployments or the Strait of Hormuz. The most dangerous element is the timeline pressure Trump has placed on himself. He stood in front of Congress in his State of the Union address and said he would not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. He deployed 2 carrier strike groups at enormous operational cost. He told the American public and the world that diplomacy was the last chance before military action. If Vienna produces nothing, he has no political room to keep waiting. A president who has publicly committed to military action as the alternative to a failed deal cannot simply walk away without consequence for his credibility. And Iran knows this. Tehran knows that Trump's political clock is running. They also know that their own population has endured 4 decades of sanctions and economic suffering, and that 68% annual inflation is producing exactly the kind of internal instability that makes the regime genuinely fragile. Both sides need a deal. Neither side can fully accept the other side's terms. And 2 aircraft carrier strike groups are floating in the water between them, counting down. Leave a comment right now. Type A if you think Vienna produces a deal and war is avoided. Type B if you think the strikes happen within 30 days. Type C if you think this drags on for months with no resolution while the region burns slowly. Subscribe and hit the notification bell because the next 7 days could change the entire geopolitical map of the Middle East, and everything that happens there will affect oil prices, global security, and the future of nuclear deterrence worldwide. The clock is not just ticking, it is almost out of time.